I want to take you somewhere before I tell you what happened this week. Not to Los Angeles. Not to a federal courthouse. Somewhere further back. 1984. Amritsar. A temple complex under siege. Because if I open with the story first, a gang leader charged in America, a murder in Canada, you'll watch this as a crime story. Case closed. But it's not a crime story. It's the latest chapter on something that's been running for 40 years. So let's go back. June 1984. At approximately 7 PM, then Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, gives the go-ahead for Operation Blue Star. This paved the way for tanks to roll into the Golden Temple complex in Amritsar to capture or kill this man, Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. So the tanks rolled into the Golden Temple. Artillery was used against the Akal Takht, the seat of Sikh temporal authority. Bhindranwale had become somewhat of a militant leader. Now, a lot of Sikhs, they can argue for and against the word militancy. However, the Indian government had one mission, and that was to capture or kill Bhindranwale. But on the day the tanks rolled in, there was a religious festival at the Golden Temple. And it was packed with thousands of people. This wasn't just any ordinary day. The complex was full of pilgrims. So Bhindranwale was found dead inside the complex. But after a few days, the devastating reality started to sink in for the Sikh community.
At the height of the battle, there were 3 hours of hand-to-hand fighting. Battle of the Golden Temple has been hard-fought and costly.
The Indian government said there was up to 500 people dead, but independent organisations and local people in Punjab at that time, they say it was as high as 3,000. That gap has never really closed. And that's the first thing that you have to sit with in this story. Even the basic facts of that wound are still open today, disputed for 4 decades.
I think I've had a pretty full life. And it makes no difference whether you die in bed or you die standing up.
Indira Gandhi would indeed die standing up. For just after 4 months after Operation Blue Star, she would be assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards. Within days, anti-Sikh pogroms would riot and run crazy through the streets of Delhi and other cities in India. Some say the Indian government say that the death toll was around a few hundred, but I think collectively everyone knows it was into the thousands. It took decades for any of the organisers of these killings to be brought to justice, but most people have never ever been held to account for this. This is the moment that the modern Khalistan movement stopped being a fringe idea and became a lived grievance for the Sikhs. Hold on to that, because everything that follows runs on the same wire. Sikh families who lived through 1984, or their parents, they didn't just stay in Punjab. A lot of them left and they went to Canada. Canada became the largest Sikh population outside of India, and for decades a large section of that diaspora has kept the Khalistan dream alive. Not through violence, but through advocacy, referendums and political organising, which India claims is a threat to national security. One of the organisations doing the organising in Canada was called Sikhs for Justice. One of its most visible figures in British Columbia was a plumber turned temple president named Hardeep Nijjar. India designated him a terrorist. He was, in India's official framing, the head of a banned Khalistan Tiger Force. In his own community's framing, he was organising an unofficial referendum, a symbolic vote amongst the diaspora on Sikh self-determination. 2 readings of the same man, neither reading resolved. And then on June the 18th, 2023, it stopped being an argument about labels.
Hardeep Nijjar was gunned down in the parking lot of Guru Nanak Gurdwara on June 18th.
Nijjar is shot outside the temple where he served as president in Surrey, British Columbia. 45 years old, killed by masked gunmen in a parking lot. But just 3 months later, then Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stands up in Parliament and says Canadian intelligence is pursuing credible allegations linking the murder to Indian government agents. New Delhi calls this absurd. Diplomats are expelled on both sides. Canadian police arrest 4 Indian nationals in May 2024 and openly say they're investigating if these men have any links to the Indian government. For 2 years, that's where the case sits. Allegations, denials, an open investigation, no indictment naming the person who pulled the trigger or who ordered it. Then, this week, that all changed. July the 7th, 2026. US Attorney Bill Esley stands at a podium alongside the FBI, the LAPD and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and unseals federal charges. The name at the centre? Lawrence Bishnoi. 33 years old, head of a transnational Indian criminal syndicate, and he has been in Indian custody running that syndicate for over a decade. The indictment alleges Bishnoi and his childhood friend Satinderjeet Singh, also known as Goldie Brar, directed Nijjar's killing from inside an Indian jail cell using smuggled phones. Prosecutors say Bishnoi supplied co-conspirators with Nijjar's photograph and multiple known addresses to track him down. This wasn't a standalone charge. It was part of something codenamed Operation Hardball. 37 defendants, 3 transnational syndicates, 2 years of investigation, arrests across the US, Canada and Spain. 24 people taken into custody in a single sweep, 11 in California alone. Now here's the fact that I want you to hold on to precisely, because I'm not going to let this story get sloppier than the evidence allows. This indictment does not name the Indian government as a defendant and does not mention of state involvement in the killing. That's on the record, and I'm getting that out there so that you're not sitting assuming otherwise. But that's exactly why the next part of this story is more important than the indictment itself. Rewind to November 2023, a separate US indictment, this one naming Nikhil Gupta, an Indian national, charging him with conspiracy to murder another US-based Khalistan activist on American soil. But unlike the Bishnoi case, that indictment explicitly mentions an unnamed Indian government official, designated as CC1, to have directed the plot, whilst claiming to act from within the Indian intelligence or establishment. Now, I'm not going to tell you that Bishnoi is a state operative. It doesn't say that in the official documents. And I'm not going to claim any more than what the papers suggest. But what I will say is this: when a jail don's hit network intersects, twice with the exact 2 activists that India has spent years designating as enemies and a national security threat, calling that a coincidence requires more faith than calling it a pattern. And India has had 2 years to answer that pattern and cooperate. Instead, it has resisted extraditing Bishnoi. He remains today in a jail in Ahmedabad, India, awaiting domestic trials, whilst Washington states it will seek his extradition. India has resisted any sort of cooperation with the Canadian authorities, calling the entire premise of the investigation an attack on Indian sovereignty. And here's the part that should unsettle you more than the indictment itself. Relations between Ottawa and New Delhi haven't hardened since this killing. They've thawed. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney visited India in February. Open trade talks projected to close by November. Those talks are continuing right now, even as the US federal indictment places Bishnoi at the centre of this assassination. But yet they're still visiting and wanting to do trade deals. Surely if a foreign government was involved in the killing of one of your citizens on your soil, you wouldn't be wanting to do trade deals, you would be wanting answers. And the Sikh community are saying plainly, Ottawa is choosing a trade deal over justice for one of its citizens. Ottawa is choosing the trade deal rather than protecting the Sikh Canadians in the country. So here's the scoreboard as it sits in July 2026. 1 gang leader charged, 1 fugitive still at large, an Indian government that denies any role, a parallel case that mentions an Indian intelligence agent that India has never answered to, and a 40-year wound from Amritsar. that no court in Los Angeles is ever going to resolve. I started this video by taking you to 1984 instead of 2026, because you had to see the line before you see the dot. Amritsar, Surrey, Los Angeles. 3 buildings, 4 decades apart, one story that's never actually ended. Until India answers the pattern and not just one indictment, I don't think it will end here. Let me know your thoughts.